Hi everyone. Really sorry about that. Our final guest, Peter Berry from Bacchus, will be on his way. He is just fighting a car machine to the death, as you do at Salutes. But we're going to get ahead with our second panel of the day, which is our small-scale Epic Games panel. And we're delighted to be joined by presently five panelists. We start with the Warlord Games' Gabrio Tolentio, also of Black Seas. Round of applause, everyone. We then, of course, have the great Henry Turner of Turner Miniatures, star of 3D printing. And Mantic Games is Matt Gilbert. How are you doing? And at the end, we have Rock Mini's own Richard O'Keefe. So, well, we decided to hold this panel this year. I say we, Peter, who was here earlier, who comes to me in a very excitable way and goes, John, we've got a panel idea when we should do a small-scale panel, because people love small scales. And me, who's been collecting Heroics and Ross miniatures since I was about 12 when, well, I don't think there's anything new about that, but apparently there's a big wave of it that you guys are all benefiting from. So I thought I'd start by saying, for all of you, why did going into small-scale manufacturing, small-scale work really appeal to you? What made it really exciting? We'll start.
Yep, okay. Yeah, for me, it was a way to reduce a lot of the burdens that life puts in the way of people who want to do wargaming. You know, we all love wargaming, but people's lives have changed and things have become reduced, space, time, cost. And I saw it as a way to kind of mitigate that in my own life and enjoyed it so much and got into doing small-scale gaming so much that it transitioned into a business opportunity for me. But it was a solution to a problem. And I realized that I was discovering something that had been there for a very long time. I've been doing wargaming for 20-odd years and never touched anything below a 28mm figure. And then the first time I painted something small and played a game with it, that was it. I was sold.
I think from our point of view, from Mantic's point of view, I think we looked at it and the games we had already, and it was a good way for us to explore our IP and the universes that we created in a more majestic way, I guess, in terms of scale, and a great way to explore new ideas for new units or new formations or things like that that were probably impractical financially, at least initially, from a 28mm point of view. You can try it at the small scale. When people love it, you say, okay, well, that's a great thing to then take back up into the other scale.
In my case, I was an aspiring sculptor, not so good with infantry yet, and small-scale miniatures just looked very doable to me, and also it was quite possible to offer like a Kickstarter where you could model as many nations as possible, including like really weird ones like Denmark. Not that Denmark's weird, but in Napoleonics, it's not the army that you'd commonly see on the table. So just doing sort of the weird and wonderful stuff, there was a kind of a hole in the market there. But as for me personally, like the smallest miniature I'd ever personally painted was 15mm, but 6mm I'd always sort of looked at from afar, and I think from an aesthetic point of view, it just looks much better for conveying the massed look of a proper battlefield. I think 28mm Napoleonics is an acquired taste, at least for me. It looks a bit more like a big skirmish, if I'm going to talk the fighting words. But yeah, so I just like the huge scale of 6, I guess.
Hello. So I think John Stallard, our founder and CEO, would be a much better person to sit in front of him. But I had a very long chat with him yesterday about this panel, and he told me a story of when he was in the US and he was watching a large-scale reenactment on American Civil War, as they do. And what he noticed is a big wall of blue coming down the hill, and there was no space in between either of the shoulders of the reenactors. And that basically made him just think of the ranges that we do. And to echo what Henry said, the 28mm soldiers, no matter how you position them, always have a gap, and they don't look to be that wall of soldiers coming towards you. Hence his idea of creating strips of soldiers that you assemble, and they look as a solid block of men that you can assemble and paint on the table. So it kind of scratched the itch of that visual appeal of the mass battles that otherwise you wouldn't have had with the 28mm scale.
And that's interesting. I mean, if you're looking at the big resurgence and the big it moment in terms of small scales, it is the birth of Warlord Epic, which, you know, has transformed how a lot of people who, as you say, have only ever engaged with historical war games through 28mm, through black powder, through bolt action, suddenly thinking about these larger scale battles, about that shoulder-to-shoulder effect, is opening new perspectives to people. And I think, I wonder from Warlord Games, what's been the perspective of, from the rules writing, from the commercial side of going, oh, we are approaching our rules, how we do war games with this smaller, grander scale in mind. Has it changed how you do things in any way?
Not completely. I have to say the rule system that we use are established, and in a way, the rules were designed to work on that larger scale. So they kind of are adapted for a smaller scale, but they work with lots and lots of units, with all the commanders and their involvement and how all that dynamic works in the three historical main systems. They're all, I mean, they've got nuances, but the core of the system is basically the same. And having many units on the table allows you to exploit those rules and to make them, you could say, more appropriate to that scale. So in that case, in that way, it didn't really change much. But again, I have to mention John, because he's a master of the industry, and he wanted to bring the small scale to the masses as much as possible, and therefore having them in plastic at a reasonable price point, I think achieved that in quite a good way. And when we then tried to push that as well with other things that we explored in our different kits, but in terms of how did it change our approach, I don't think it did. It's just the objective is to get more people into wargaming, and that still remains the set.
Can't be mad about that. I mean, but it's interesting how you say sort of bring it to the masses, but from you guys, you're already there. The masses have come to you already. I mean, what's it been like with you guys, Mantic, moving into it, expanding your ranges into that? What's been the reception like? What kind of changes have you made? What have you been excited to push in how you've treated your IP with it?
As I say, I think it certainly lets us explore the IP in different ways, and it's about that. What Gabrio was just saying. It's the visual thing that you instantly see when you've got a small scale army. You know, what you're seeing is proper battle lines rather than like a small scale border skirmish or something like that, which 28mm really represents. So I think from that point of view, it helped sell visually the IP, and allows both those us and players to explore that in different ways, and put new narratives and new ways of playing the game, and of course the rules adapt to that through command and abstraction and stuff like that, which is typical at that scale. But yeah, I think that's the initial thing was. It's all about the visuals, I think, for us.
Yeah, I think the visual element is what attracts a lot of people, and I speak to loads of people at shows about the visual element. They immediately sit and they're like, wow, it's an actual battle on the table rather than a skirmish. But I think it's also an opportunity for people to kind of change how they're doing their hobby, because you've got to treat the scale differently. Obviously, we look at how the rules change based on the scale to kind of sell the feel of how the game plays, but how you model and paint the miniatures also changes based on the scale. You're not concerned about painting the individual. You're not concerned about, doing all your edge highlights and things like that. It's a much more, liberating way to do the hobby, because people are free to kind of just get a bit of color on the model. And like you said about the wall of blue, it really is that look of the block of troops. You can pick out a few details. It's often good to paint a banner nicely or something stand out, but you've not got to be as particular. And I think people then feel like they're making some more progress in their hobby time. Time is short for a lot of people. Being able to sit down and paint a unit in a sitting and have something to present on the battlefield next time they play, I think is a big change for a lot of people. And I get that comment a lot from people. They think it's going to be difficult to paint because it's small until you help them realize you just paint it differently. And then it isn't the hurdle that people feel like is there.
It is one of these things where you paint a 28mm figure and you put it on the distance of the table. If it's not happy, you're kind of like, But you paint a 6mm figure in 3 minutes and you put it on a table. It's over there and it's tiny. If it's the right color, it's the right color. And I suppose that does leak into your sculpting side, Henry, in that your sculpts are magnificent, but you've also very neatly done it like it will look fine. It supports how different people paint, whether they paint as mass groups, whether they go in for the detail.
I think I've been helped by the fact that I have a kind of more of a sort of engineer or logical way of looking at a model compared to more organically minded artistic sculptors, because most of my stuff is essentially just basic shapes that I have formed to like a minimal printable thickness. So I try to get a kind of pragmatism going around that. And then there are also the fact that a lot of the poses are just shared between multiple nations, just with different toggles over the top and things. So in that way, yes, it makes very blocky miniatures with easy parts to pick out. I just wanted to say on the painting topic that I found that when I first started trying to paint 6mm, you almost have to teach yourself not to paint anymore, like unlearn everything, because I was trying to do everything the same way like I would have 172. So I had like a French unit that I think took me 3 days because I was trying to like do the edge blacking on the side of the cross belts, go over the white until it was firmly white, do the trims on cuffs and things like that. It's the way to madness if you.
And at some point, you realize that nobody can see the cross belts, not even you. But that's fine. But it's that whole painting thing. I think is interesting you say that, because it is the thing people, the biggest like, oh, I don't really want to go near the 6mm of the painting. And it's I'm perhaps the wrong person hosting because I love 6mm, but I've never found it particularly difficult. But it's interesting what you say about relearning it and how once people get that edge, you can just start churning out huge. I mean, what for you guys? What's been the most interesting small-scale painting project?
Certainly from Mantic's point of view, I think the epic Warpath stuff is, the first thing we did, the natural place we went is to take our 28mm models and say, okay, well that's the paint scheme for that army, and then you start doing that and it's like, okay, that doesn't really work. Okay, painters, you're free to change that if you want to, and that was actually being quite liberating, like you say. So, they've come back and said, well, how about this, and how about this, and how about this spot color, which we only need to put in these places. And it's like, okay, wow, that pops. Look at that in photographs, and look at that from the distance, and yeah, that absolutely works. So, yeah, you're totally right. It's a completely different experience, and our painters have found that.
Yeah, and I like to display all my miniatures. No offense to people who live and die by 3D renders, but obviously because I'm selling physical miniatures, I want people to see what they look like. And for me, it's that I get to paint a little bit of everything. It's a very long paint queue, but it's the variety that it brings and the chance to use colors. And I'm glad you said about color, because I found I had to relearn how to use color. I've always been a dirty, grim, dark painter. And painting at a small scale has taught me to completely relearn that in bright, bold colors. Certain armies lend themselves to particularly ridiculous colors, especially dealing more with the fantasy and sci-fi elements. But teaching myself again, okay, you can go crazy bright with this, and once you get it on a small model, that pop, like you said, someone said pop. Was it you said pop of color? Someone said
might
pop.
have been me.
Might have been you. It really is that visual. Oh, that's what catches your attention, but you've got to go over the top with it. So it's again freeing to do something crazy and bright that I never would normally have bothered touching.
For me, anything from like 15 to 28mm, I would always start with like a white undercoat in most cases, sort of working down with very watered down paints, multiple layers, lots of washes, that kind of thing. And that's the habit I had to break out of, because I found that with 6, you really are just fine off with like a black undercoat and just your basic colors and maybe some highlights on top of that. And that is very like pleasurable in and of itself. It is quite fun, especially when you get doing it rapidly. My favorite thing I ever did was an Imperial Guard Ulan, like for the French, which I think I had as a picture on one of the Kickstarters. Unfortunately, it's very rare that I paint nowadays. Like you say, it's all just renders, because to me, painting always felt like the activity when I want to feel productive in my free time. And unfortunately, now just sculpting on Blender does that. And so if I'm in that mood, I just work, and I seldom paint anything nowadays, unfortunately.
For me, it's two, if I may, two projects. One is land battle based, and the other one I'd be remiss, as we're talking about small scale, if I didn't mention that there are also non-land based battles.
Yes, of course.
War games, namely ship based, and it is small scale because it's 1/700. Two projects of painting is the way that you approach painting a ship in 1/700 is you forget about the highlights. And that's a stage that you can go mad with, knowing and having managed the heavy metal team in Games Workshop back in the days. They taught me a few tricks, and I mean, 30, 40 layers of highlights is just the norm, and then they go up from there. And yeah, so painting a ship with 0 highlights, yes, please. So that was one project. And the other project is, being Italian and Warlord having brought Romans out, I obviously had to do the Romans. It's just so much easier to just go with the bold colors, like everybody said here already. It's just liberating is the word that they've used, and I would say that as well. And with very little effort, as long as you do unlearn all those special skills, then yes.
It is interesting because, as you said, if you're like, what is the first Warlord Epic project? It's Black Seas. It's the 1/700 warships. How did you...
If I may, it's Cruel Seas.
Cruel Seas.
Which is John's game,
John's
I have
game.
to say.
Yes. That was first, wasn't it? Yes.
Cruel Seas was first.
Yes. But it's interesting that when you... How did they decide, you at Warlord decide to go for 1/700s? What was the decision? We're doing ships, we're doing it at this scale, why not going low? Because, when people think Age of Sail fleets, often that's talking 1/1200s, 1/2400, even smaller. And it's,
Well, when you're approaching a project like that from complete scratch and from a blank page, that's the first thing that you ask yourself is, how does the game look on a standard 6x4 gaming table? And how can I fill it with still leaving enough space to maneuver and to be tactical and to have a game out of it? And in Cruel Seas, it turned out to be a weird 1/450-ish scale, something like that. And in Black Seas, because the ships were a lot, you needed more of the bigger ships rather than small MTBs, then when you're approaching it with that aim in mind, then the scale to go for is 1/700. It's just the best that you can think of, that I could think of at the time.
It's a good scale for that sort of like Master and Commander, frigate action, all the MTB stuff. And yet, sorry, I'm thinking the correct wording for this. It's still a big leap for Warlord. It was still a big leap for you guys to go from the 28 mils down. Were there concerns at the time about going that away from your traditional?
No. As I said, the ACWs was all driven by John and his vision, and then he made it happen. And there was absolutely no doubt in his mind that it would be a great success, like it has been. And there was people in the world out there that had doubts. I never did. He never did. Nobody in Warlords, I believe, had. We just believed in the vision, and it turned out to be absolutely bang on.
I'm just going to take a slight pause because Peter Berry has successfully beat a card machine in battle. Can we have a round of applause, please? Thank you for joining us, Peter. Did you win? No. Okay. We were just sort of talking about how, the big leaps into going into 6 mil. Of course, you've been at Bacchus working with small-scale miniatures, 6 mil, and now 10 mil, having acquired the old Madison military range. For 25 years? Is that right?
Yep. Can you hear me? 25 years in 6 mil, man and boy.
And going in, when you first went into it, what was it like moving into the scale, developing it? Was it, because, you're in a world of 20s and 28s, and you're out here with miniatures that people sort of put the glasses on to look at closely.
Let's say it was a bit of a hostile environment to start with. 6 mil well, small scales in general, but 6 mil in particular, lacked a lot of credibility within the wargaming community as a whole. It was viewed as being not even peripheral to the hobby, and it took a lot of time and effort to convince people that small scale figures could, first of all, look nice and have an appropriate amount of detail on them, and they weren't just blobs, which was a perception at the time. And second of all, that it was quite practical to put on really nice looking games and play them just as it was with the large scale figures. That took a long time, but I fully believe that now it's a very, very different environment to the wargaming world, and that small scale wargaming is just another aspect to the hobby. As Warlord have proved, there is an appetite to play large battles, small scale figures, which only vindicates what I've been saying for years. So thank you very much.
I mean, it's interesting because before both Rich and Matt were talking about the scale that you can put on a table. I mean, there's nothing better, I think, than a big Bacchus table with lots of figures on it. And I mean, I think, how do you speak to, when you think about designing figures, the strips, have you always been thinking in your head of, I want big battalions, lots moving?
Oh, yeah. It's no use playing skirmish games with 6 mil figures. I mean, that is absolutely pointless. But there's
I think it sounds like a challenge.
It has been done, and it's still being done. But there's a very simple rule I've tried to put out, again, pretty much since I started doing the small-scale figures, which is the larger the scale of action, the smaller the figure you need. The smaller the scale of action, the larger the figure you need. So for my thinking, 28mm figures are wonderful for skirmish gaming. I've got English Civil War skirmish figures in 28mm. But if I wanted to put on Marston Moore, I wouldn't do it in 28mm because my arms aren't long enough, my wallet isn't deep enough, and I don't have the patience to paint that many big figures. Small scale is the way to go for big actions. And if you look at it in that way, and again, Warlord approved by taking that out into the wider world, it's a concept people can readily take on board.
I was going to say, I think the interesting point of view, and I think the genius of the ACW stuff was, of course, that one frame serves both sides, so you don't have much in terms of sculpting and output, and you've done your whole game with as minimal tooling and stuff. Really, we came into Warpath, and of course we've got over enthusiastic, and we've got 8 armies, and then you look at it and you're like, oh, we've got 200 different models to sculpt. It doesn't matter that they're this big. Half of them have got to be engineered for plastic and half not. So it actually was for us, it was a massive learning curve they're just this big. It's easy. It's not. So genius. Well done to John.
But it is interesting sort of opportunities of going, oh, there's different things you can do different scale. You can get away with different things. I don't know, you talked about going into starting this with, 6 mil Danes, which, for a long time we just go, well, that's a guy in a hat. Yeah, that's a Dane. Fine. How do you get that kind of that sort of characteristic, that sort of difference across at a small scale? I'm asking it to Henry, but if anybody else wants to chip in, please do.
With Danes, it's just really headwear, I guess, if I'm remembering them right. So, to be honest, your method probably wasn't all that wrong, especially if you could find some 6 mil sort of Royal Marines, because the
top hat's
kind of, the sort of top hat thing is kind of similar about it. But I also think, at least I know when I was collecting armies, I always had a little niggle when I knew something wasn't quite right or was technically wrong. And maybe I have too much of a fragile ego, but if someone sort of leans over your table kind of, it sets me off. And I think people like to know that it's correct. Plus, I mean, my stuff I've always tried to market as being multi-scale. Technically, you can scale them up to 15 mil, maybe, if you do it asymmetrically. So the details are there. And if I'll tell one sort of dirty little secret of 3D printing, or at least selling the STLs, it is renders sell models, and the renders showing what might not necessarily be so apparent on the final 6 mil. So yeah, I've got the buttons arranged nicely on the plastron. Are you going to notice it on a 6 mil print? I don't know. But people look and they see if you put that attention in, I guess, hopefully that means that you did a good job. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd say coming back onto the how to paint as well, I think people are always surprised with the smaller scales, how much detail you can capture at that size. You mentioned blobs. I think people are surprised with smaller figures that if you use something that's highly contrasting when you're doing your paintwork, you can have the details that are there, even if they're just simple, basic ones, pop out, and people don't expect to see. They expect to just see that wall of color. They're not also expecting to see, once they get the model up close, that there's that detail there. And with 3D print, I'm slightly biased, but with the improvements in 3D printing and things like that, those details, and with plastic injection coming on leaps and bounds, those details can be there, and you don't have to pick them out, but with simple washes, they jump out, and people are surprised. And those details are what let you capture the character. You know, you want specific things. You think, oh, 6mm figure, they're all going to look the same, but you can see 10, 15 different units and see that, oh, actually, they're all quite unique. Just with a little bit of a color and getting in that detail, you can really make things stand out. So I think the variety at the small scale is there when people really don't think it's going to be.
Yeah, if I could just add to that point, to prove that, if anybody wants to wander over to my stand, this isn't a real plug for my stand a lot, but you'll see that in action. We have got units there, we've got Samurai, we've got World War II, we've got some brand new Landsknechts. They're all different. They're not just little blobs with bits of paint on, they're all individual sculpts. And in terms of detail, we have a Franco-Prussian War officer standing that big, but he's actually got a monocle. From the monocle, there's a lanyard which goes down there and looks back into his pocket. Nobody's ever going to paint it, but I know it's there.
It makes you very happy.
Exactly. So, yeah, just go and have a look. As has been said, the right kind of paint job. High contrast, high colour, and the figures will pop and look exactly like what they're meant to be.
If I can give you a little bit of an insight into the design, we've recently brought out, I don't know if you've seen the announcement, an epic range for American War of Independence, Revolution or Rebellion, depending on the points of view. And I was heavily involved with the design of that. And the discussions, the type of meetings we were having is, oh, the water bottles on the back of the soldiers, are they round or are they square? Because at some point they changed them, and by golly, you can. First of all, they're at the back, and
are you sure?
I challenge you to see if they're round or well, you can. In fact, you're right. You can tell that they're, but really, it's the level of detail that nobody will ever appreciate the time of effort that goes into designing it.
But it's interesting because you talk about all these conversations about design and what you can do now. How, big technological changes in printer, in 3D design, and injection molding have transformed how 6mm is done. I mean, people who have been involved in the industry for longer than longer than I've been able to count, which is a dangerous thing to say. So how has technology pushed what you can do with smaller scales?
Well, obviously, I mean, Henry will tell you all about the 3D printing revolution in actually producing models at home, but we're using 3D designs now for our straight line modeling in World War II. So our new vehicles, our new aircraft are all designed as 3D, and then they are printed and patterns taken from it. It's not as simple as that, because you can't just take a scale model, an exact scale model of a 3D tank, and then take a print from that and then make a mold. It won't work. You have to caricature. Every model any of us produce is a caricature. It has to be, otherwise it won't cast, it won't print, it won't look right. Sometimes you've got to take a Sherman, for example, and lose some details and add some details to make it a little more Sherman-y. Otherwise, it doesn't look like a Sherman. And that's an art form which is quite tricky to get right. And I think we've all done trial and error and got it wrong.
It's the guns. It's the guns is what get you in not to deviate too much, but in 28mm, if you sculpt a gun in the proper scale, it looks tiny and wrong. It just doesn't look right. So you've got to exaggerate it. I mean, just one of the many examples. But yes, absolutely, I completely agree.
My entire career thus far has been trial and error and getting a lot of stuff wrong, to be honest. And my first ships that I released, I was stupid enough to actually try do like 1-to-1, because at the time I didn't own a printer. I hadn't really interacted with resin enough to know how fragile it would be. So I had the railings at like the correct thickness, the guns at the correct thickness, and it would be the case that you could just sneeze on the model and the guns would fall off, you know. So like, I absolutely agree. Gun barrels is what I imagine that Sherman tank, having to beef those up. In my case, on my recent World War II range, because my guys are, you know, they're little chonkers, I did the Piat launchers, like pretty realistically looking proportion, but then when they're actually in the model's hands, it looks like a super soaker. So it is all about just having the eye just to know what you need to beef up and change, yeah.
It's definitely something we learned. So when we started sculpting all our Warpath stuff, it was our normal 28mm sculptor who's amazing and knocks it out of the park every time. But he started on the Warpath range, and you know, halfway into it, we just looked at it and went, "This is not going to work." He couldn't make the leap from one to the other. So we had to go and find people who did understand the scale and the different way you needed to sculpt and proportion things, and the different tolerances that you've said, just to make it work at that scale in the different materials as well, which is always different considerations again.
Yeah, and I think the difficulty of materials is definitely the right way of phrasing it, because it's also having the right materials for the job. You know, some models render better in metals, some in plastic and resins, and again, with resin and 3D printing, you know, obviously it's come on leaps and bounds, but if you use the wrong material for the scale, you're going to end up with, you know, people are going to open a box of models and spear tips separate because they've not survived being handled. And, you know, how many games do we play with our models? You're picking them up over and over and over again. They've got to not only look right in terms of, oh, that looks a bit off, they've also got to be handled a lot, and they've got to perform time after time after time. You know, we all drop models and they occasionally break, but if during the painting process things are coming apart, it's something that's got to be taken into account, because, you know, they are small. Their swords are what, 1 millimeter? I don't know what sizes you actually use, but, you know, a sword is like 1 millimeter thick. That's nothing if your material is too rigid and hard and fragile. It's just going to snap. So yeah, the material lessons to be learned in handling things at a different scale is quite a change.
It's the spears. If you look at the spears and look at the soldier holding a spear, it looks as if it and you imagine it in real life, it looks as if he's holding a telegraph pole. It's just, and yet it looks right at that scale. So and you can handle it. A good point.
I always think about my father's got a huge collection of pike and shot armies in 50mm, old minifigs 15mm. And I remember I came back and very excitedly when I've replaced all those horrible big metal spheres. And I was like, oh, that's nice. And then I picked up a model and then had to go and get a plaster because he put the thing, which was a solution. But it's interesting here. You're right that a spear looks wrong. But we're happy with that at smaller scales because it gives us that right look. It's all about that getting it to feel right at the distance when it's all the way on the table over there.
I was just going to say, if I could offer one PSA, if you are printing small miniatures, don't overcure them. Obviously, do select the right resin, but I've seen a lot of people that work with like all the right materials, that they've done it all correctly, but then they stick it in a UV machine for 1 minute, and the model that comes out is brittle. With smaller stuff, you just need to be much more careful. Just in case there are any like printing people in the audience, that would be my bit of advice if your spear tips are flying off.
And if we're talking about 3D printing and advice, as I was talking to Henry earlier, please make sure you've got proper ventilation on your 3D printer because it's nasty stuff, yeah?
The South London Warlords does not endorse 3D printer-based poisoning. Just to say, we don't. Don't do that, please.
Guys, this even goes through to metals. We have worked on the formula of the metal that we've used over many, many years to get the right mix of flexibility and robustness. If it's got too much tin in it, for example, things will just snap straight off. If it's got too much, well, lead mainly, but other materials, they'll just wilt. And you have to find a happy medium which gives a bit of give, but not too much. And that has taken quite a long time to get right.
It is one of these things where there's a certain forgivability to small-scale stuff, you know. The number of small tanks I've got where a barrel's fallen off and I've sort of gone, yeah, okay, I'll go on the table anyway. Because there's a great sort of like is with the distance, with the scale. I think there's a forgivability for new gamers, new painters, in that there's a lot of flexibility. I don't know if that's something you encourage when you're trying, when you've got people who aren't quite sure that it's a very forgiving, everything's quite forgiving about these scales.
May I just say that if you were looking at true scale, you wouldn't actually be able to see the barrels on most vehicles at 1/300 because it would be so thin they would just disappear. And certainly you wouldn't be able to see MGs, but people like to have them on the models. But some barrels are very, very long and very, very thin, and they would just disappear.
I know I'm a little bit partisan in this, but what I would say to that is plastic is king. And
I wonder who
we won't get into
predicted
a fight
this.
over that.
But it does come back. Yeah, I think. So, as we come to the end of this talk, how do you sell someone who walks up to you and goes, "Oh, I'm never going to pay anything that's 28 mil again"? What's your 1-sentence, 2-sentence pitch? You've got 2 sentences to convince somebody who only paints 28 mil to paint small scale.
When was the last time you finished an army?
I'd look at the terrain and I would say, where are you going to put your 28 mil castle in your house?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really beat the first one. I mean, it's just nailed.
He's got to say, yeah.
You should have just dropped your mic at the end, because I
We
think
could have really killed
it.
it. I should have finished with you. Sorry.
I guess from the 3D printing perspective, I'd say you take supportless sculpts, nice simple ones, you drop them on the plate, and they're done, and you're printing. If you're printing 28 mil, well, good luck spending the next 2 days pre-supporting the lot, because the creator's done an F job because he outsourced it to... Sorry. No, I'll leave it there. I'll be scathed.
so the question is how to convince somebody to go from 28 mil to... so first of all, I would acknowledge that 28 mil is the God scale.
Right.
However, if you want to have an answer to that, if I could use this word, megalomaniac tendency of a general and having the entirety of an army on a table, which I guess I'll speak for myself, I have, then that's the only way to go.
Exactly. Well, I think we have about 5 minutes for a couple of questions. If my wonderful colleague there, Mark, runs up and grabs a microphone off me, if you've got any questions, raise your hand, and Mark will find you. Find the people, Mark.
I will find you.
Hello. How important do you find the rules for the actual game are when trying to sell the game and the miniatures?
It's really quite important. The biggest question I get asked is, what rules do you use to play a game? And the simple answer is, any rules that you use to play any scale of any game, because when it comes down to it, we play with little bits of card and MDF and plastic, and we stick interestingly coloured bits of metal and plastic on them. Those bits of metal and plastic can be any size. It's the actual area taken up by a base that counts. So if you like playing Pike and Shot, if you like playing Black Powder, if you like playing Furioso, you can play in 6 and 10 just as you can play in 15 and 28. And then you've got the vehicle that people can buy their armies with.
Yeah, just if I might add, the only difference that we apply to the rule system between 28 and 15 is purely the measurement distances, which have to change. Everything else stays the same. So,
I think from my point of view, and I think as a games designer, and I think from a player's point of view, we were talking about liberation before, going from the granularity as you head towards the larger scales and going the abstraction as you head towards the smaller scales can be quite liberating, just from a games design point of view, and it all ties into that spectacle thing. So instead of thinking about individual units and the characteristics of your heroes and things like that, you're stepping much, much further back and you're thinking about battle lines and how terrain might affect it, and you're much more into higher level command rules and things like that. So I think it's a very different way of thinking, and it's a very different way of potentially playing and thinking of that narrative as you're playing the game. And I think that is a liberating thing too.
Yeah, and because I'm not tied to a particular game system with what I'm selling, I ask the person what it is that they enjoy about gaming and what do they want to get from the game they want to play. They want to, so take fantasy, 10 mil for example. If they want to play something big and sweeping and command-based, I would say we'll try War Master. It's a community-driven rule set. They want to play something that's a bit more old school rank and file, positioning and combat centric. I tell them to play Kings of War and just use centimeters instead of inches. Because it's about what they want to get from the game, not saying this is how you play small scale. You play small scale however you enjoy gaming, and it's just trying out the different ways to do it and finding what fits for you and or your gaming group.
I'd echo what Peter said and just say at the end of the day, they're miniatures. It shouldn't really radically change your thinking. I'm one of those people, like very common to my age, I guess, who came into wargaming through the usual sort of Games Workshop pipeline. And I think that for some of us, it's a bit of an adjustment to make to realize that actually you have freedom and you can pick anything you want. You could even like homebrew rules because you're just so used to being in this fixed ecosystem where rules are dictated at you and there are the official models. The beauty of historicals is that you've got the freedom to do what you want. The only area where you really need to be careful with small scale stuff is your basing, I guess, because that can limit you in ways. So just ask around. Like I see it asked on my Discord a lot of the time. People ask, like, what basing do you go with? And people come up with like modular ways where bases can be put on top of other bases to make them compatible with different rules, that kind of thing. But I think that's the only way you can go wrong is if you mess that up.
I think we've got, because we started a bit late, I'm going to be a bit kind. I think we've got time for one or two short questions if anyone's got any more.
Any more hands?
The gentleman over here.
Mark is finding you.
Movement trays, yes or no?
Movement trays, yes, no?
If it floats your boats, movement trays. If it doesn't, no.
Yeah, I'm with the smaller basing units that you can then rank up together on movement trays for some games. Come into what Henry says, that way you don't goozle yourself by gluing everything to a giant base and then you can't play the game that needs individual stands removing.
Exactly the same answer, to be honest. It's nice to be able to take them off and put them into a square or something if that makes things more interesting. But at the end of the day, you're going to do your back in. It's not fun to lean over things trying to move little individual bases like this. So, yeah, definitely a yes.
Yes.
Any more for any more? Take that last one at the back.
Yep,
then.
got one at the back.
Thanks. You talked a lot about 6 and 10 millimeters. Is 2 millimeters a bridge too far for the hobby? You lose too much detail?
Oh, God.
Can worms.
Yes.
I asked one earlier.
For me, I think then you're moving into the real spectacle element, and the scene and the terrain for me then becomes the focal of the game at the smaller scale. But I have never tried it, but I'm certainly willing to. I think that the terrain aspect would appeal to me more.
I think you're into the should you be using tokens, because there's some cardboard pieces that are more than 2 mil thick, and then you just go, wow, you can put some nice artwork on the pieces of, and there are lots of war games that you can play and are fun to play with tokens. So I think there's that balance with our hobby where you want the soldiers to look like soldiers and not like tokens of soldiers. They are actually. And there's a scale down to which that disappears. So I think it's, yes, I agree. Too far.
You've got some insidious gears turning in my head where I'm thinking, can I just release cylinders and say French soldier and charge you lots of money for them? Maybe I can. But no, more seriously, I know some people have printed my stuff at 2 mil and they crop them all really, really close together, so they're a bit tougher. But you still lose bayonets and things. So I do admit, I look at those and I think that's very cool, but yeah, I agree. Maybe tokens or brush bristles or something like that. It is more about just the big macro scale, the scenery, that kind of thing around the models, rather than the models themselves.
So just to clarify, when you see the tournament, there's 2 more range come out, it'll be worth all the money. But I think we're going to round off our panel now. I'd like to big round of applause for all of our panelists. And good luck, Pete, with your card machine. But yeah, we will be back at 12:45 for our Wargaming in the Real World panel. I'll see you all then. Well, I won't. Alex will.